Well, I'd like to talk you through a little bit of tuning I'm doing. I'm working with BetaFlight V2. I'm on PID controller 1, and I'm just sort of tweaking the tune a little bit better. And after today's flight, I felt like the roll axis was a little bit, I don't know, undertuned might be a good word for it. I didn't feel like it was sloppy or soft. I just felt like there was a little bit of maybe wandering on the roll axis that I didn't like. Like maybe rolls were overshooting just a tiny bit, or occasionally I was having to correct an unintended shift on the roll axis. And so that got me thinking. I have a philosophy that I mean, typically what you would do if you had that kind of scenario is you would increase your eye gain because we think of eye gain as being for attitude hold. And it is, in that the P term alone will not do a very good job of maintaining attitude over time. But there's an interaction between the P gain and the I gain that I think maybe is not obvious. And that is that if the P term is not doing its job adequately, then there will be lots of error, and the I term will have to pick up and correct for that error. So if you've got a scenario where the I term isn't working hard enough, it's not maintaining attitude as good as it ought to, you can increase the I term, of course, but you can also increase the P term. And when the P term or the P gain gets higher, there will be less error, and therefore the I term will have less error to correct for, and it'll feel almost, you'll have an effect almost as if you had increased I gain. But there's a real difference there. Increasing the P gain sort of sharpens up the response and makes the copter feel much more locked in and controllable. Whereas increasing the I gain can make the copter feel stiff because the I term works over a much longer time horizon than the P term. So obviously there's a point where you've gone too far, right? If you raise the P term to the point where oscillations are occurring, then you've gone too far and actually you cause more error. But anytime you'll notice that the copter maybe feels a little bit wandery, maybe you're having to sort of nudge it around. It's not holding straight and true. Or maybe at the end of a turn, it kind of wallows out a little bit. It sort of tips out of the turn just slightly, and you have to nudge it back into the turn to finish the turn going straight instead of sort of sliding out the other direction, something like that. You may think, oh, well, I need to raise my I gain. But if you can raise your P gain, that can have a better effect with less unwanted negative side effects. So anyway, so I was thinking about that, and I started looking at my black box logs because I mean that's always a good insight, and I'd like to sort of take you through what I found. Now here's just a regular old, just a straight pass down my driveway, nothing really to see here. And if we look at just to get a baseline sense of what the PID is doing on the roll axis, first of all, we can see, that BetaFlight V2 is pretty incredible in terms of, these lines. It's amazing how well it works, and you really have to shift your perspective on what these lines are supposed to look like. I would really say that the D term was way too noisy if I was looking at BetaFlight V1 because of all these little spikes. But it flies really good, and that's I've always said if it flies good, that's what matters. We need to look at black box and figure out what a good flying copter looks like, not have a preconceived notion on what a good black box trace looks like and expect that to make a good flying copter. So as we go along, it's just doing its thing. And I don't see any signs of like excessive P gain. So the first thing I want to look for is my P term too low, just right, or on the edge of too high? And I'm looking for oscillations, and my throttle is relatively high here. And let's just play this a little bit as I raise the throttle on this long straight pass and see what happens. Okay, so really no oscillations there. No high throttle oscillations, feels pretty locked in and good. It's all good. And now we come to this turn. And as I do this turn, we can see the P term spiking and pushing. And that's where you're starting to get in the realm of high enough, for me anyway. I found that I want the P term to be a little bit on the edge, um, especially with BetaFlight. You really get the best prop wash handling of anything I've seen so far. And so you can really, whereas before you would get really bad prop wash oscillation if you had your P term turned up remotely high, and you really had to make a choice between having a too soft flying copter and having lots of that prop wash oscillation. With BetaFlight, I think you can walk that line a little finer and have still a reasonably sharp response on your copter without having tons and tons of this oscillation. But we can see here that when you see the P term spiking like this, spike, spike, what that means is that instead of kind of finding its level and staying there, it's pushing too hard and having to back off, and pushing too hard and having to back off, and pushing too hard and having to back off. And so that means it's certainly not too low. Maybe it's hard to say if it's too high, but it's definitely not too low. And here we can see the answer to our question. So should I increase my P gain to try and fix some of that wanderiness, that slight wanderiness on the roll axis? And I think this is a very clear answer that the answer is no. Because we can see here in this prop wash oscillation, now granted, it's prop wash oscillation, and that's the worst case scenario, but we can see that the roll P term is really flipping out here. And that's only going to get worse. So I knew there was some oscillation on prop wash, but I wasn't sure if it was in roll or in some other axis, maybe pitch. But I really wouldn't want to see this get any worse. And really, in fact, I might even knock my roll down a little bit. Or, seeing as the throttle I'm at, I'm going to go through this log a little bit more and see if it's consistently have this oscillation at high throttle. Because currently I don't have any TPA. And so it may make sense to put a little TPA on here to bring that in the line instead of reducing the roll, the roll P gain. So then the other question to ask is, can I afford to raise my I gain? And we can see that the I term is relatively responsive here, especially like, whoa, look at that. Look how fast it moved there in terms of, it's a very narrow slice of time here. It went up and down. But it's a little bit hard to judge there because, like I say, the whole thing is very dynamic here and flipping out. And if we look at this turn here, we can also look at the I term during the slightly less dynamic part there, and we can see that it changes sign over the course of that move, but it's not. We could stand to change that, to raise that a little bit, and we can see here that the P term goes negative. We can look at how fast the I term changes to match the sign of the P term. So the P term goes negative here, and the I term goes negative here, and the time there is 23.3 to 23.6, so 0.3 of a second. That's not very long. So if that gets too long, then the I term will be focusing too far sort of into the future and will take too long to respond to current conditions. It'll sort of still be living in the past, if you will. And so you'll have already finished the turn, but the I term will still be like trying to make the turn happen or trying to get you out of the turn after you're on the straight and it's not going to fly like you want it to. But with 0.3 of a second there, that's not too bad. So so I'm not too worried about that. I think I can stand to go up a little, and because if indeed there are other examples that show that we consistently have this oscillation at high throttle, because again, prop wash oscillation is not necessarily always going to happen at high throttle. Sometimes prop wash oscillation may happen at mid throttle just because the airflow is so dynamic. So if it consistently happens at high throttle, a little TPA may bring it into line. Now, I do want to point out how relatively well behaved the roll P term is when I'm not going through these crazy dynamic prop wash situations. And here we've got another relatively straight line, and we do see some oscillation in the P term, and that's normal. That's normal. If we listen to the motors, we don't hear it. And let me turn my computer volume all the way up here. We don't hear it and we don't see it. We don't hear any sort of warble or oscillation in the motors. We don't see any jello in the camera or any kind of vibration or oscillation there. So if all I was looking at was this, I would feel very comfortable raising the P gain on roll. But we get then to a scenario like this, where I'm going around this turn and watch. Now that was pretty, actually, as prop wash goes, that was not too bad. That was pretty subtle. But again, we can really see here, there's this moment where the P term is really flipping out. How's my throttle there? 16, 16, well, it's already really past that point. 15, 1590. So what I might do, I'm a little bit torn because uh, I I often cruise. I mean, if we go back and we look at that cruise, we can see that during that cruise, my throttle's at around 1600. So I'm often cruising at around 1600. That's just sort of my normal throttle position, around 1550, 1600, 1650. So we see that right here, TPA would not solve this because I don't want to soften up those PIDs at all when I'm just flying straight. I need that to be as sharp and locked in as I can. And so I wouldn't want to have TPA down below, certainly any lower than 1600. So in this scenario, I'm still going to get this prop wash unless I can tune that out as sort of a default. So it may not, if I reduce my P gain, then I may get rid of this oscillation, but I may have a little bit softer flight the rest of the time. Of course, the third thing that I haven't talked about yet is increasing the D term. And the D term should both have a dampening effect and it should have an accelerating effect, as has been talked about some on RC groups lately. So maybe the answer will be to increase D, and that'll help this situation get a little better. Anyway, just some thoughts. I hope they were helpful and educational, and happy flying.